You walk out to your porch with a cup of coffee. The air is crisp. The sun is just hitting the fence line. And you look at your garden. You've done everything right. You bought the expensive bags of premium soil from the big box store. You hauled the heavy plastic jugs of blue liquid fertilizer. You spent your Saturday morning tilling, sweating, and following the instructions on the back of the package. But the result still feels hollow. The soil feels brittle under your boots. The plants look upright, sure, but they don't look alive. They look like they're on life support, waiting for their next hit of chemicals. And then, you walk back inside and do the one thing we've all been taught to do without thinking. You peel an orange. You crack a few eggs for breakfast. You trim the ends off some carrots. And you throw it all into a plastic bag in the trash can. Stop right there. Let's be honest about the way most people think about waste. We see it as a problem to be moved. We pay a company to come to our driveway, pick up our garbage, and take it to a place we never have to see again. We are paying someone to take away the very energy our soil is starving for. The secret isn't in the store-bought bag. The secret is sitting in that bin under your sink. You don't need a massive infrastructure or a degree in agronomy. You just need an old bucket, a little bit of forgotten biology, and the realization that you've been throwing away black gold every single morning. Maybe you've tried this before, and it didn't go the way you planned. You heard the word compost and felt that surge of excitement about doing something good for the earth. You picked a corner of your yard, gathered some kitchen scraps, and threw them into a heap. It felt like the right thing to do at the time. But a week later, reality started to set in. That pile didn't look like the black gold you saw in magazines. Instead, it turned into a soggy, rotting mess that began to take on a life of its own. It started to smell like a stagnant swamp, or worse, like something had died underneath the porch. Suddenly, you were fighting off swarms of flies every time you walked near it. Your neighbors started giving you those looks, the kind that says they're about to call the neighborhood council. Eventually, you gave up, shoveled the mess into a bag, and went back to buying those blue liquid chemicals. I want you to know that this failure didn't happen because you lack a green thumb. It happened because you were treating that pile like a graveyard when you should have been treating it like a stomach. Most people think composting is just letting things rot in a corner, but that's where the system breaks down. Pure rotting is a slow, cold, and often stinking process. What we are actually looking for is a process of controlled biological combustion. When a pile smells, it is a distress signal from the microorganisms that they are either suffocating or drowning. They are essentially screaming for help through that odor. We aren't going to just let things rot in the backyard anymore. We are going to build an environment where the right microbes can thrive, multiply, and work for you. Once you understand how to balance the life inside the bin, the smell disappears and the speed of the process triples. You don't need luck or expensive additives. You need a system that breathes. By the time we finish these 7 steps, you will see that your waste was never the problem. The problem was the environment you provided for it. To understand how a banana peel becomes a tomato, you have to look closer. You have to see the invisible engine working beneath the surface. Think of your compost bin exactly like the AA battery in your wall clock. A battery is useless if it only has one side. You need the positive and the negative for the energy to flow. In the world of soil and life, those two poles are carbon and nitrogen. Carbon is the brown material. It is the fuel, the wood for the fire, and the energy source. Nitrogen is the green material. It is the spark, the protein, and the building block for life. In simple terms, carbon is the coal, and nitrogen is the heat that sets it off. Most people fail because they don't understand the balance of these two forces. If you only throw kitchen scraps into a bucket, you are overloading the nitrogen. The microbes get too much protein, and they start to panic. The pile becomes wet and slimy. It begins to smell like a chemical factory because the nitrogen has nowhere to go. It is like trying to start a campfire with nothing but a gallon of gasoline. It creates a fast, dirty burn that leaves nothing but a mess. On the other side, if you only have dry leaves and straw, the battery stays empty. The carbon just sits there, brittle and gray. There is no spark to start the engine. This is like having a fireplace full of heavy oak logs but no matches. The secret to the high-yield garden is the ratio of 3-to-1. You want 3 handfuls of dry, brown energy for every 1 handful of fresh, green spark. When you hit that ratio, the invisible engine starts to hum. trillions of microorganisms begin to wake up from their sleep. They are the smallest workers on your farm, and they never take a day off. They begin to eat, to multiply, and to move through the pile. This movement creates friction. The friction creates heat. If you stick your hand into the center of a healthy pile, it will feel hot. It can reach 150 degrees on a cold winter morning. That heat is the proof that the engine is running. It is the smell of productivity, not decay. It is the sound of life turning waste into power.
Move through the porous
Oxygen
soil
is the
towards
breath that keeps this
microworkers.
fire burning. Without air, the microbes suffocate and the engine stalls. This is why we don't just dump waste into a hole. We build a structure that allows the system to breathe. You are no longer just a gardener. You are an engineer of the most efficient power plant on Earth. You are managing a biological reactor that runs on things people pay to throw away. When you see the steam rising from your bin in the morning, you'll know. You'll know the battery is charged and the black gold is being manufactured. Step 1. The vessel. You don't need to spend hundreds of dollars on a fancy plastic spinning tumbler from a glossy garden catalog. The first step in building your nutrient factory is finding a simple, sturdy vessel, like a recycled 5-gallon bucket or a wooden crate. Think of this vessel not as a trash can, but as the living skin of your biological reactor. It must be strong enough to hold the physical weight of the damp material, but it absolutely must be able to breathe. Take a power drill and a 1/2-inch bit to create several dozen holes all around the sides of your bucket. Do not forget to drill plenty of holes in the bottom as well to allow for drainage and air intake. We do this because the good bacteria, the ones that create the black gold, are aerobic organisms. This means they require a constant supply of fresh oxygen to survive and work. Without these holes, the air at the very center of your pile will be used up in just a few hours. When that oxygen disappears, the entire system flips from a clean energy plant into a stagnant swamp. This is the invisible obstacle that catches nearly 90% of beginners. They believe that by sealing the bin tightly, they are trapping the nutrients and preventing a mess. In reality, they are suffocating their tiny workers and inviting anaerobic bacteria to move in. These bad microbes produce hydrogen sulfide gas, which is exactly why a poorly made bin smells like rotten eggs. Anaerobic decomposition also creates a highly acidic environment that can eventually harm your plant's roots. By providing these holes, you are creating a passive ventilation system that keeps the furnace burning clean. You want your vessel to feel like a breathing part of the garden, not a plastic tomb for your kitchen scraps. If you choose to use a wooden crate, the natural gaps between the slats will act as your ventilation. Just ensure the container is placed in a spot that stays relatively steady in temperature throughout the day. Your factory is now ventilated, sturdy, and ready to receive its very first intake of raw energy. Step 2. The shred. Once you have your vessel ready, the second step is all about the surface area. You must chop, rip, or shred every piece of material before it enters the bin. Cut your orange peels into small bits and tear your cardboard boxes into 1-inch strips. Think of this like chewing your food before you swallow. Microbes can only eat from the outside in, so smaller pieces mean more entry points for the bacteria. A whole apple might sit in your pile for 6 months without changing at all, but a diced apple can be processed by the biological engine in less than a week. Shredding also helps to mix the carbon and nitrogen more effectively at a microscopic level. The biggest mistake you can make here is the lazy dump. This is when you throw in massive, whole pieces of waste or thick, woody branches. These large objects create cold spots in your reactor that drain the heat away from the core. They act like anchors, slowing down the entire cycle and making your final harvest uneven. Spend just 60 seconds with a pair of shears or your hands to break everything down. This simple micro step is the difference between a fast factory and a slow, rotting heap. Step 3 is the foundation of your entire operation, and we call it the air intake base. Before a single peel or scrap enters the bin, you must lay down a thick layer of coarse, woody material. Aim for 3 to 4 inches of dry twigs, wood chips, or small, broken-up branches. Think of this as the structural plinth, or the iron grate, at the bottom of a wood-burning stove. The reason we do this is to ensure that fresh oxygen can be drawn in from the bottom holes and pulled upward through the pile. As the microbes begin their work, they generate heat, and that hot air naturally rises. Without a clear path at the bottom for fresh air to enter, the chimney effect stops, and the biological engine stalls. This woody base also acts as a critical drainage system for any excess moisture that filters down through the layers. If the bottom is clear, the water moves out. If it's blocked, the water pools and turns the base into a stagnant bog. The most common mistake at this stage is dumping wet, green material like grass clippings or kitchen waste directly onto the floor. The weight of the material above will compress those wet scraps into a dense, airtight, slimy plug. This plug cuts off all circulation, and without air, the beneficial microbes die almost instantly. This is precisely where that foul, swampy odor begins to develop in most failed compost piles. By starting with a structural air gap, you are building a lung for your garden that will breathe on its own. You are ensuring that every cubic inch of your reactor stays aerobic, healthy, and highly productive. Step 4 is the lasagna method, and it is where you balance the chemistry of your biological reactor. You are going to build your pile in alternating layers of greens and browns to charge the battery correctly. Start by spreading a thin layer of your shredded kitchen scraps or fresh grass across the woody base. Immediately cover that layer with a much thicker blanket of dry, carbon-rich materials like crushed leaves or shredded cardboard. We call this the lasagna method because you are stacking the fuel and the spark physically on top of each other. By layering them, you ensure that every scrap of nitrogen is in direct contact with a source of carbon energy. This is the most efficient way to keep the biological current flowing throughout the entire volume of the bin. The thick carbon layer acts as a natural biofilter that traps nitrogen gas before it can escape as an odor. It also serves as an insulator, keeping the moisture and the internal heat locked inside the core, where the microbes work. The biggest mistake you can make at this stage is the nitrogen bomb approach. This happens when you dump a massive heap of wet kitchen waste in one spot and forget to add any browns on top. Without that carbon blanket, the wet pile will mat down into a solid clump, cutting off oxygen and attracting pests. If you can still see your food scraps from the top of the bin, your layer is not finished. Always finish your stacking session with a thick brown cap to keep the heat in and the flies out. Think of it like building a campfire. You don't just dump a bucket of fuel on a cold floor. You layer the tinder and the wood so they can feed off each other in a controlled, powerful, and clean burn. This careful stacking is what turns a messy garbage pile into a professional-grade nutrient factory. Step 5. Water is the medium through which all life in your factory moves. Think of the microorganisms as tiny swimmers that require a thin film of moisture to travel and digest the waste. Without this water, the biological engine will simply grind to a halt as the microbes enter a dormant state to survive the drought. But there's a very fine line between a productive dampness and a drowning, stagnant flood. The gold standard for your nutrient factory is the texture of a perfectly wrung-out sponge. When you are building your layers, you should add water in small, deliberate increments, almost like seasoning a gourmet meal. The material should feel distinctly moist to the touch and hold its shape if you squeeze it in your palm. If you see water pooling at the bottom of the vessel or pouring out of the side air holes, you have gone too far. Excess water fills the tiny air pockets that were meant for oxygen, effectively suffocating your aerobic workers. This is the moment the system switches from a clean furnace into a rotting, smelly mess. Conversely, if the material feels brittle or looks dusty when you move it, the heat of decomposition will never ignite. One of the most frequent mistakes is assuming that kitchen scraps provide enough moisture on their own. While scraps are wet, the dry browns you added will quickly soak up that moisture and leave the pile parched. You must be the manager of this internal climate, adding a splash of water every time you add a dry layer. Check the core of the pile every few days by sticking your hand into the center to feel the humidity. If it feels like the humid floor of an ancient forest, the microbial current is flowing at its peak. If it feels dry, you are losing time. If it feels soggy, you are losing the battle against rot. By maintaining this perfect balance, you ensure that the black gold is being manufactured every second of the day. This is not just about dumping water. It is about managing the hydration of a living, breathing creature. Step 6. The core ignition. Once the bin is full, the most difficult part of the entire process begins, the act of waiting. This is step 6, the core ignition. the moment when your biological reactor officially starts its engine. You must leave the pile completely undisturbed for 3 to 5 days to allow the internal temperature to reach its peak. This heat is not a product of the sun or the summer air outside your home. It is the direct result of pure thermodynamics and the intense friction of trillions of microbes working at an incredible speed. If you stick your hand near the center of the bin, you should feel a powerful, radiating warmth against your skin. A high-functioning system will easily reach temperatures between 140 and 160 degrees. We require this intense biological fever because it serves as a natural pasteurization for your future garden. This heat is what kills off dormant weed seeds and neutralizes harmful pathogens that may be hiding in the raw scraps. Without this high-temperature phase, your factory is merely a pile of waste. With it, it becomes a sterile, life-giving resource. The most common mistake at this stage is becoming impatient and turning the pile over far too early. Every time you stir the layers or open the core before it reaches its peak, you are letting that precious heat escape into the air. It is exactly like opening the door of a hot oven while a loaf of bread is trying to rise. The temperature crashes and the process stalls. You might even see white steam billowing from the top of your vessel on a cool morning. Do not be alarmed. That steam is the visual proof that your invisible workers are thriving and the engine is running clean. This is the moment of true transformation, where raw materials are broken down and reassembled into a superior form. Your job during this step is simply to stand back and guard the environment you have so carefully constructed. Let the furnace finish its work and trust the ancient science of the earth to do the heavy lifting for you. Step 7. The seventh and final step is the moment of truth, where you separate the pure black gold from the raw mechanical parts of your factory. After the heat of the ignition phase has subsided and the pile has cooled down, you will find a dark, crumbly material at the bottom of your vessel. To harvest this resource properly, you must pass the entire contents of the bin through a simple wire mesh sieve or screen. We do this because the microbes work at different speeds. While the soft greens have turned into earth, larger chunks like wood chips or pits need more time to break down. By sieving the material, you ensure that only the most stable, nutrient-dense particles reach your garden beds. The finished compost should look like dark chocolate cake crumbs and smell like the fresh floor of a forest after a spring rain. Take the larger pieces that remain on top of the screen and put them right back into the start of your next batch. These unfinished chunks are actually biological starters that are already covered in the very microbes you need to ignite the next cycle. The biggest mistake you can make at this final stage is being impatient and using hot or unfinished compost directly on your young seedlings. Unfinished compost is still chemically active and will actually compete with your plants for nitrogen as it continues to decompose in the soil. This can lead to a biological conflict where your plants look stunted and yellow, despite being surrounded by what looks like rich earth. Always wait until the material is completely cool, stable, and dark before you let it touch the sensitive roots of your food crops. Once sieved, this material is no longer waste. It is a high-yield concentrate that will transform the productivity of your land forever. You have successfully closed the loop, turning a daily liability into your most valuable homestead asset. Now that your factory is built and the layers are stacked, you must learn the language of the pile. This is step 5, the field test, where you use your own senses to communicate with the trillions of workers inside. A high-yield system is not something you set and forget. It is a living partnership that requires a specific rhythm. The most important tool you possess for this task is not a thermometer or a laboratory kit. It is your own hand. Every 3 to 4 days, you must perform what the old-timers call the squeeze test. Reach deep into the center of your bin and pull out a handful of the material from the core. Close your eyes and focus on what your skin is telling you about the environment you've created. If you squeeze the material and water pours out between your knuckles like a soaked rag, your factory is drowning. This is a signal that you have too much moisture and not enough air. You must add dry browns immediately to stabilize the system. If the material feels brittle, dusty, or falls apart like dry sand, the biological engine has stalled from thirst. What you are looking for is the squeezed gold. The material should hold its shape like a ball of dark chocolate cake. Ideally, only 1 or 2 tiny drops of water should escape when you apply maximum pressure with your grip. This sensory feedback is the only way to ensure the current of life is moving through the pile at peak velocity. Beyond the moisture, you must also listen to the operational rhythm of the heat. A healthy bin has a heartbeat. It rises in temperature for several days and then slowly begins to cool as the food is consumed. When the center of the pile no longer feels warm to the touch, that is your timing gate, the signal that it is time to turn the material. By turning the pile, you are physically moving the outer, cooler materials into the center of the furnace to be processed. You are recharging the battery by introducing a fresh burst of oxygen into the core. Think of this rhythm like the breath of the garden, inhaling oxygen and exhaling the heat of transformation. This isn't a chore. It is a ritual of stewardship that keeps you connected to the cycle of your own food. If you maintain this rhythm, the waste will transform 3 times faster than a pile that is simply left to sit. You are managing the pulse of the earth, and the results will be visible in every leaf and fruit in your garden. Even with a perfect blueprint, invisible obstacles will occasionally rise up to test your resolve. 90% of people who start this journey will stumble because they forget that a biological reactor is a living thing. If your bin begins to release a sharp, stinging smell like ammonia, it is a distress signal that your nitrogen levels are too high. Your engine is leaking energy into the air instead of storing it in the soil, and you must balance it with more carbon immediately. You must also be an absolute gatekeeper for the raw materials that enter your factory. Never use wood ash from industrial plywood or treated lumber, as these materials are saturated with toxic chemicals that will kill your microbial workers. Beware of the lazy dump where food scraps are left exposed, inviting pests and breaking the thermal seal of your reactor. These hurdles are not signs of personal failure. They are simply the system reacting to an imbalance in the environment. When you learn to read these signs and troubleshoot them in real time, you are no longer just a gardener, you are a steward. But this journey is about much more than just producing a bigger tomato or a greener leaf. It is about the fundamental identity you are building as an independent person on this earth. We have been conditioned to believe that we must buy our way into success, but that is a model that has failed. True independence is not found in a bunker or a warehouse full of plastic jugs. Real freedom is having a dinner plate filled with food that grew from the energy you reclaimed yourself. It is the quiet, powerful satisfaction of needing fewer products from a system that views you only as a consumer. By turning your waste into high-octane fuel, you are closing the loop of your life and returning to the forgotten science of our ancestors. I am not asking you to transform your entire property or your whole life in a single afternoon. That is the path to burnout and frustration. Instead, I am asking you to start small, with just one 5-gallon bucket sitting in the corner of your shed. Save your morning coffee grounds and the peels from your fruit today. Take that first micro step and witness the profound change that happens when you stop throwing away your power. Take control of your waste, and you will inevitably take control of your future. Step out of the cycle of dependency and into the rhythm of the natural world. Build your factory, feed your soil, and finally, find your freedom.